With the escalating threats, the violence we're seeing in America, some of it coming from Donald Trump's federal government, some of it coming from elsewhere. The big news today is something that no one wants to see in the powder keg of Minnesota, but a brand new attack on a lawmaker. Now, that's bad no matter what. If that's all you heard, that should be enough to know that's a bad thing. And there have been times in the past few decades where people would all acknowledge in leadership that that was bad. But because this is a Democratic lawmaker, this government has had a different type of response. The president, who has talked about, quote, a slight de-escalation or changing his tone, isn't doing that. And we measure these things over time. You don't get to dial up the pressure, the rhetoric, the violence, unleash actual violence against American citizens, 2 now slain, then take a break for a day or two, claim that's de-escalation, and then go back to attacking people in ways that are misleading and incendiary when we have these open probes. There is also no indication that these federal agents operating under Trump's orders, ICE, DHS, and the rest, are scaling back. There's heat in Minnesota. Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar attacked last night at a town hall, as you see here. This man sprayed her with an unknown substance. If you are on the receiving end of something like that, it is at a minimum extremely scary because you actually don't know what you're being hit with. You can see how it unfolded. This was moments after she was calling for Kristi Noem's resignation. Here's the moment.
And DHS Secretary Kristi Noem must resign or face impeachment. I don't know.
Oh my God! Oh my God! He sprayed something on her.
I need.
That was the scene. There's a close-up of what looked like a syringe with the substance. Again, thankfully, she seems to be okay, and we have that reporting. But in the moment, what we're talking about here is a very menacing act, and you don't know what's in it. He's been arrested and charged with third-degree assault. The Congresswoman says she is okay, and she will not let these kind of attacks win. Our colleague Chris Hayes is in Minnesota, where he has been reporting. He just interviewed the Congresswoman, a very newsworthy interview, and he joins us in our coverage here on this program in a few moments. The president would not lower the temperature or afford her any kind of the grace that he has called others to treat his side with when they have faced horrific attacks or even violence, or in some cases killings recently, which are all abhorrent. Instead, he didn't live up to his own test, and he made statements that I'm not going to report on in detail here, just except to tell you that they were evidence-free. But as for what they were, they don't make our standards as reporting part of our news coverage because they have no basis in truth. But you should know that he's being dishonest about what happened on the very first day it happened, failing his own tests and any normal leadership. And, of course, he's in charge of the federal government that is supposed to prosecute any violence, whether it's against the American people or their lawmakers and elected officials. More on that in a moment. MAGA fans have been spreading misinformation. All this after federal agents shot down 2 Americans, protesters slain in broad daylight. The Trump administration says the agents involved in the Preddy shooting have now been placed on leave. And there's a lot of pushback. There are Minnesota business leaders and companies calling for the federal government to at least do the bare minimum of the normal cooperation with state officials into what happened, because avoiding or defying that makes it look like a cover-up. And these officials, these business leaders, are concerned that that means we won't necessarily get to the bottom of this. A handful of Republicans also raising their voices.
Americans don't want to see people killed in the streets. And Americans don't want to see the kind of hunting down people in a way that really demeans the process.
No American believes that he was assaulting the officers. In fact, the opposite appears to be true. So we have to get some rules of the game.
Stephen Miller never fails to live up to my expectations of incompetence.
None of this happens in a vacuum. We have data that the threats against lawmakers jumped not 10 or 20%, but about 58% in the last year. And so how did we get here in America? What is happening now? Well, one giant, obvious problem is that the president of the United States has come out for political violence repeatedly. And he's come out against the safety of police. He's come out for the convicts who attacked police and for the convicts who tried to threaten, menace, hurt, hang, assassinate, or kill lawmakers in both parties. The president would have people believe and wants everyone to see this as some partisan war, blue states and red, but it's not even that. And by the way, all violence is wrong if it targeted a Republican, a Democrat, or for whatever reason. But it happens that a lot of this violence has been waged against both parties, against Mike Pence, for example, and against Nancy Pelosi. And the president blessed the attacks. He pardoned those Jan 6 convicts. Remember Senator Josh Hawley, who, like Donald Trump, had made a public show of being open to what those Jan 6 protesters were planning? And that was, of course, before they actually stormed the Capitol, sending him and other Republicans running quite literally for their lives. Thank goodness we don't know what would have happened if the angry mob found lawmakers or found Republican Mike Pence or found Democrat Nancy Pelosi. Again, the titles and parties don't matter except to remind you that this was violence against all kinds of elected officials. As the violence today still needs to be investigated, the wider context is that Donald Trump not only encouraged, blessed, rewarded, cheered this on, but literally freed people who had many years left to serve in prison. That's why Donald Trump is one of the most anti-police presidents we have. And if that kind of cuts against how he talks, well, remember, he's been caught lying about all kinds of things. So he may have messaged something else. He's also very much against free speech, trying to cancel the shows of people he disagrees with, trying to abuse power that way, suing everybody. He's one of the most anti-First Amendment presidents we've had, at least in the first year of the second term. We can measure these things. So you have to put aside the PR propaganda and remember, this is a president who has taken the side of criminal convicted violence against lawmakers and taken the side of those against police. Is it any wonder we have a public safety problem in this country that is coming from the federal government, or that we have people who think, some of them, I can't speak to exactly today yet, that investigation's ongoing. But in general, you can find message boards on the internet full of people who think that violence is okay because their president said so and he pardoned them last time and maybe he'll do it again. That's the wider context. When punishment is gone, deterrence is gone. We have a president who is anti-police, is for government violence against the people, and has failed in one of the prime duties of any president, one he said he would try to fulfill: law and order. Law enforced equally to prevent and punish violence so that we might have order. And as about 58% plus of Americans have noticed, we don't have order in the places where Donald Trump is most involved in putting agents in the streets. What we have, as a factual matter, are slain Americans and questions of a cover-up that goes to the top of this White House.
In Minneapolis on Saturday, just hours after Alex Preddy was shot and killed by federal agents, ICE agents and police were seen deploying tear gas near a preschool during enforcement operations. Thousands of miles away, dozens of immigrant families are seen protesting behind the fences of a Texas detention facility. It's where a 5-year-old Ecuadorian boy and his father were sent this week after being detained in Minnesota. Some of them holding signs that, translated, read "Liberty for the kids." At this point, it is difficult to see any of these incidents in isolation as we witness these threats and the deadly, violent tactics being deployed by federal agents on the streets of American cities. Our next guest, Miles Taylor, reminds us of this, quote, "Far from a situation that spiraled out of control, what has happened in Minnesota is by design. It is the deliberate implementation of top-down presidential guidance. And it's working. Officials are turning DHS into a juggernaut for ridding America of so-called, quote, domestic terrorists, whose crimes appear to be that they hold viewpoints contrary to the president." Miles Taylor also warns, quote, "I must concede that its critics were right. The young department was susceptible to abuse. It's now rife with corruption. And when Donald Trump is gone, it must be remade entirely. That is, unless we want a police state." We're back with Miles and Claire. Miles, this is an incredibly stark piece that you've written. Say more.
Look, I resisted saying this, Nicole. I'll be honest with you. My wife and I have actually been fighting about this for a few years. We met at DHS, and I like to say we found love in a hopeless place. But she has argued that DHS needs to be totally reconstructed. She's argued that it was ripe for abuse, all of those things, that it needs to go. And I resisted that because, in the Bush administration, I went into government to help build DHS. I believed that DHS was one of the solutions to preventing another 9/11. But you know what, this year, Nicole, I have fully come around to her viewpoint. It's been liable for abuse, and now that's what's happening. Donald Trump has fully hijacked the department to act as his pocket police. And those critics for years have been right. And I think a lot of us never imagined the greatest threat to our democracy would come from the inside until Donald Trump arrived on the scene. And I'll just say, Nicole, it's not just about ICE and CBP. We can talk a lot about ICE and CBP, but as Claire knows from her time overseeing DHS from Capitol Hill, Donald Trump has co-opted all of the agencies of the department. He's sending the Secret Service to investigate his political opponents like James Comey. They're sending USCIS to take away visas from students who write op-eds they don't like. They're using FEMA money as a cudgel to punish blue states and to reward red states. You can go through the entire department and see how Donald Trump has remade it into a political machine and a revenge machine. And we got to make sure no president is ever able to do that again. And that starts with deconstructing the department.
Claire, do you agree?
Yeah, listen, Homeland Security, the department, was really an experiment in many ways. It was an outgrowth of 9/11, and it was an attempt to try to bring together disparate parts of government that all would operate under the umbrella of keeping America safe and secure domestically. And it has always been a problem. I mean, when I was doing oversight, as Miles probably remembers, I used to go crazy when I would ask a question like, how many contractors are there working at DHS? And nobody knew. Nobody knew how many employees there were, how many contractors there were. It was really never a tightly run ship. And what it has, and Miles pointed this out in his article, it has a lot of guns and badges. And that's what Donald Trump loves more than anything. It has a lot of guns and badges. And now it has so many guns and badges, it dwarfs any other law enforcement agency in the country, including the FBI. So it does need to be reconstructed. It doesn't make any sense for FEMA to be in the same place as the Secret Service. That doesn't make any sense. And there's a lot of other parts of DHS that Americans don't even realize are all cobbled together within this one agency. So I would look to some of the people who have done a lot of oversight of Homeland Security, like Susan Collins, for example. I'd love to see her speak up about how we redo Homeland Security so there isn't this much power that can be abused in one place.
I mean, let me just play the devil's advocate with both of you. I mean, Donald Trump has abused the Department of Justice as well by forcing out MAGA-friendly career prosecutors who refused to go to a grand jury absent facts to indict Jim Comey, replaced that U.S. attorney with Lindsay Halligan, who a judge described as, quote, masquerading as a U.S. attorney. He's turned the Pentagon into a department that Democrats and Republicans have accused of carrying out war crimes in the Caribbean. He's turned the State Department into an agency that was involved in some way with producing a speech in Davos that angered and alienated the loss of life from our closest allies, Canada and the UK. I mean, you could argue that Donald Trump has destroyed every pocket of the federal government. What is so uniquely corruptible about DHS, Miles?
Well, it's just that it's so young, Nicole. It hasn't developed these mechanisms to resist. And you're completely right. There is nothing that can fully insulate the U.S. government against a wannabe dictator. And our founders spent literally years and years, decades of their lives thinking through all of history back to antiquity about how you could construct a government that would guard against a wannabe dictator. And they even conceded that, in fact, their best advice was, please don't elect one. So we can't make it perfect. But what you have seen at all the agencies you just referenced, at State Department, at DOJ, at these other places, you've seen more pushback than you've seen at DHS. It's been harder for them. It's been a slog. You've seen people resigning, becoming whistleblowers, going out there publicly. It's been a huge pain in the butt for them to try to take over these other departments. DHS, I don't know. There's been a handful of people who come forward, but they're scared. They're scared because it's been so easy for the White House to so quickly co-opt it. And that's in part, in very large part, because Stephen Miller knows that agency inside and out. He knows it lacks oversight. He knows it lacks the ability to resist. And he's personally micromanaging these offices. And according to reports, down to micromanaging individual operations. And that's something DHS was never, ever prepared to resist.
I mean, Claire, I admire your optimism that Susan Collins might be part of the answer. I do not share it. And let me just ask you this. 7 Democrats voted to confirm Kristi Noem, who wrote in her own book about shooting her dog in the face. Do you think Democrats have come to the realization that none of the Trump officials in this area are good faith actors?
I think they have. And I think those people, in fact, one of the people who voted to confirm her has already said she should resign and that it was a mistake. So, listen, I'm not saying Susan Collins will. I'm saying she's in a position she could. She worked on that committee. She and Joe Lieberman were good bipartisan partners trying to do the right thing at Homeland Security at one point in time. But and I think building on Miles' point about DHS, it's not as transparent as the other agencies. There's so many different functions within the agency. It's a little laboratory for somebody like Stephen Miller. Let's see how many levers of power I can control without anybody seeing what I'm doing. He can hide more. He can really hide more within DHS than you could at Justice or State. And also, there's not the longevity of middle management at DHS like you have at State and DOJ. I'm not saying that Trump hasn't really destroyed or tried to destroy a lot of important institutions, but I think DHS has really been the devil's playground for him.
This now is Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada.
Senator, so many things to get to tonight. Thank you for joining us. I guess first, do you, as Michael said at the top, we said Senate Republicans are finally starting to rebel against the Trump administration. Do you think that's an accurate characterization? And what can you tell us about the state of the negotiation?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and rightfully so. I think we can all watch that video, watch just what has happened over the course of several months, not just in Minneapolis, what happened in L.A., what happened in Chicago, this excessive use of force. You've been talking about it. We've all been talking. And now the American public can see it for themselves, right? They see the videos. They are living it in their communities. They know what is happening. No matter how the administration and the leadership of the administration tries to spin this a different way, the American public knows what's going on. And so absolutely, my Republican colleagues are hearing the same thing. And so, yes, they should be calling out for an independent oversight investigation. That's our role in Congress. They should be asking for Kristi Noem to resign. I've already asked her to resign even before this. She just is inappropriate for this oversight of Homeland Security, as we have seen. And so much more needs to be done. But let me just say this, I am hopeful for what I'm hearing from my Republican colleagues, that they also recognize we have 6 bills done. They're already done. That will keep the government open for those 6. We have another 6 we have to do. 5 of them we've already agreed on. So let's just vote on those and then have this discussion around Homeland, rightfully so, because the outrage for anybody who has watched this, demanding accountability, they have every right for it. And we have a role to do here in Congress.
Senator, let's talk about that funding fight and the role that Congress is poised to play. You had Leader Schumer laying out a number of demands that will be necessary in order for Democrats to support DHS funding. They included ending roving patrols, enforcing accountability, masks off, body cameras on. Senator Gallego, though, your colleague, added another element. This is via X. He wrote, "We all know who's really running things in this White House. Stephen Miller is the brains behind the most unhinged and depraved policies we've seen in generations. Americans are tired of his insane extremist vision for this country. It's time for him to go. Trump needs to fire him now. No funding DHS with that creep calling the shots." Do you agree? Should Stephen Miller's resignation or firing be a condition of Democrats voting for funding of DHS?
Well, it comes down to the accountability. And yes, everybody should be held accountable, including the leadership. And if Stephen Miller, along with Secretary Noem and everyone else, was directing ICE to go into these communities and giving them carte blanche to do whatever they want. And remember, Stephen Miller is the one that said they have quotas that they have to satisfy. I don't know of any law enforcement agency, state or local, when they go into their community for public safety, says we have a quota and you have a quota to reach. So there's a problem at the top. Whoever's directing ICE is just as responsible for the actions of the men and women on the ground when they come into our communities and they're using excessive force. That's why it's so important, this accountability piece. That's why the independent investigation is important. Independent means you're going up and down, not just the officers on the incident, but where is this coming from and why are they being told in our communities to take and use excessive force? Again, you can ask any police chief, any sheriff, that this is not a direction that they would give their local law enforcement. So if there is a problem in that direction, they should be held accountable as well.
You know, I appreciate the accountability argument, Senator, and I think Alicia raises an excellent point, which sort of levels up a potential complication. You noted to Simone just a moment ago that there's 6 other bills that remain to be voted on, 5 of which you can dispense of fairly cleanly and easily. That one is the DHS funding. You wrote a piece about that back in January on the 15th. We're still in January, sorry. On the 15th, my bill redirects funding from ICE's massive expansion and puts that money where it actually will reduce a crime back into local law enforcement while preserving ICE's regular annual funding. So you have a plan for what to do with that funding. And there's all this kind of hope that's kind of floating out there. Republicans are finally going to go along to play along and play along to go along to make it all right, right? My bet is that's not what's going to happen. And it gets to the heart of what Alicia was asking, I think, about whether or not Republicans will use the other 5 pieces, the other bills that you've already agreed on in principle, to use those to sort of berate and beat down the effort to deal with that DHS funding, because they don't want to make that cut. They want the money. They appropriated the money. They want more money to go because the order is coming from 2 people, Donald Trump and Stephen Miller.
That's right. I don't disagree. I think what we see now are the Republicans are trying to bootstrap this Homeland Security bill and appropriations with the others. That's why they're keeping it together. And that's why, for I think many of us saying, separate them out. The House separated them out. Separated them out. Let's have this vote. It's the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that we have concerns with. Even the Republicans have concerns with
that,
it.
Right.
So separate it out. Let's do our job. Don't play politics. This is too important an issue to play politics with moving forward here. And let me say the other thing here. I think a lot of the conversation is also, it's not about defunding ICE. ICE has traditionally about $8 billion, $10 billion annually. But what the Republicans did in the Republican tax bill is give this administration $75 billion to supersize ICE. That's why we see this onboarding of all of these agents. They lowered their standards for hiring these agents. They've cut back on the training, and they've sent them out with quotas and said, you can do whatever you want, and we will
just meet the number.
Meet the number, and we'll protect you. That is wrong. It's wrong for the agents to move forward in that manner. By the way, most ICE agents are not even trained when it comes to domestic policing. They're not trained in community policing.
No, because they're not police.
Well, exactly. And so that's why this is a problem. And so, again, we just have to get back to a time when they're doing their job. Secure the border. We can work on those issues. Get within your immigration jurisdiction. Coordinate and communicate with local, state, and police. Go after the violent criminals. Do not arrest U.S. citizens. Do not profile. Listen, 30% of my population are Latinos. Do you know there are U.S. citizens who are of Mexican descent who are carrying their passport because they're afraid that they're going to get pulled over or jacked up by ICE? This is absolutely not this country. And if the direction, and I go back to Ruben, what he said, if the direction is coming from not just Secretary Noem, but if it's coming from Stephen Miller or anyone else, they should be held accountable as well.
So we've got some breaking news for you. An agency spokesperson tells the Associated Press that the FBI has executed a search warrant today at the Fulton County Elections Office near Atlanta. MS Now's Lisa Rubin is following this for us. A couple things we should say that most of our viewers know. This has been a focus of Donald Trump since he lost the 2020 election, right? What happened there? We know he famously called the Secretary of State there asking him to find votes. And we also know that last week he said people will soon be prosecuted for what they did. We don't know what he was referring to. But do we know anything about what's going on here?
Well, Chris, we can tell you that last week, in fact, last Friday, a federal district court judge in Macon, Georgia, dismissed a lawsuit by the Department of Justice to obtain voter rolls from the state of Georgia, in particular from Fulton County's Board of Elections. That was dismissed because the judge said it was brought in the wrong place. Now, several days later, we are hearing news from the Associated Press and other outlets that a search warrant has been served on a Fulton County operations center in Union City, Georgia. We have not independently confirmed the existence or service of that search warrant. However, to the extent that a federal judge has already said to the Department of Justice, if you want to pursue this suit civilly, there is a place for you to do so. And they have instead escalated by starting a criminal investigation and getting a search warrant in service of that investigation. That certainly would be a ratcheting up of the sort of retribution that Donald Trump has long promised with respect to the 2020 election and other events and people who he says have wronged him.
FBI Atlanta field office statement. Good. To MS Now. FBI Atlanta is executing a court-authorized law enforcement action at 5600 Campbellton Fairburn Road. Our investigation into this matter is ongoing, so there are no details that we can provide at the moment. Is
no,
that
but
typical?
that address that you just provided, that is in fact the address of the Fulton County Elections Hub and Operations Center in Union City that we understood to be the place where that search warrant was served and executed earlier today. We do not know what the subject matter is of an investigation, but I just want to remind people, and I know this sounds very elementary, you don't get a search warrant if all you're doing is some sort of civil investigation. A search warrant is obtained only in aid of a criminal investigation, and in particular, after you have shown that there is reason to believe that a crime has been committed, and the Department of Justice and the FBI have to detail for the judge who's signing that search warrant what it is that has transpired, usually in the form of an affidavit. So we will have to wait to see.
What kind of judge would make that decision? Who would
a federal judge.
Federal judge.
In all likelihood, they have gone to a federal judge in the Northern District of Georgia, and they have made an application for this search warrant. It would be signed by someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia and would likely have an affidavit signed by someone with the FBI, which is why the FBI's Atlanta office is confirming the execution of that warrant today, Chris.
I want to bring in Greg Bluestein. He is the chief political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He is also an MS Now political contributor. Greg, I understand. Are you on the scene now? What can you tell us?
I'm on the scene at that office. It's a big blocky building in South Fulton County, which is the epicenter of Donald Trump's claims, false claims that he won the 2020 Georgia election. He's been almost single-minded about pursuing, his allegation that he won that election, which of course is false. We don't know what types of documents were involved in this search. We do know, as was mentioned, that there was a court-sanctioned activity, is what the FBI is calling it. So I'm looking right now at several people with FBI jackets on and suits who are associated with those with the FBI activity, who are standing outside, including talking to a law enforcement official. There's a lot of activity here. There's a helicopter buzzing overhead. I think it's a media helicopter. But Donald Trump has talked a lot. The president has talked a lot about his 2020 election grievances still, even now that he's president.
Let me just clarify. You're seeing people going in. Are you seeing any people going out? Tell us how much activity is actually going on there.
Yeah, we haven't seen anyone going out in the 5 or so minutes since I've been here. I've just seen there's 3 or 4 people standing outside, and there's a spokeswoman for the FBI standing outside as well, saying this is court-sanctioned activity, that she can't decline. She declined further comment pending whatever details will come out of Washington. So there's a lot of speculation going on, of course, especially given the president's rather recent comments, but we still don't know exactly what documents, what this investigation is about.
Greg, I mentioned earlier before you got on the phone that just last week the president was talking about this, and in reference to the 2020 election, he asserted that people will soon be prosecuted for what they did. We don't know what he was referring to, but I wonder if you've had conversations with people related to that office or other officials since he made that comment.
Yeah, that has been the buzz in Georgia. That sent that made a lot of heads turns in Georgia when he said those remarks a few days ago. And it wasn't the first time he said something like that, but being the most recent, we know that the fact that he lost Georgia's 2020 election has really been a grievance of his, right? We know that it's something that has consumed him, not just doing the 2021 runoffs down here in Georgia when Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock flipped those seats, but also 2022, 2024 when he came back here. Repeatedly, he says he falsely says he won that race. So it's something that has consumed him and has really affected politics down the line, right? It has affected Republican Party politics with people who say the Republican Party should move on and people who say, who agree with his grievances and say that the 2020 election should be investigated. And of course, it's affected Democratic politics as well, as Democrats say, that he's single-minded about this.
So if you could stay on the phone for us, Greg, and certainly break in if you see anything that's significant. But if I can go back to you, Lisa, again, this has been such a focus of the president. This is not the first time that he said people will be prosecuted or, we have investigations ongoing. But nothing has ever been shown. There has been no widespread voter fraud that was shown. There have been no illegalities that have been uncovered. No. So what would a judge have to see to allow this to happen?
I don't know what a judge would have to see to allow this to happen, but a judge would have to be convinced that there is evidence of some federal crime, and that goes beyond a crime in general. In order for a crime to be federalized, there has to be some hook that gives the federal government an interest in it. Federal government pursues election-related crime, but again, not of a garden variety. In fact, one of the sort of complaints about Fani Willis's case was that some of the things that she was trying to prosecute themselves were the province of the federal government. So one of the questions I have is this election-related fraud relating to 2020. Is that the allegation that they've made? Are they making an allegation about something that is ongoing or more recent in memory? We just don't know. But we do know, Chris, as you said, not only is there not any evidence of widespread fraud, there have been judicial determinations that people were defamed as a result of the accusations that were made against them. I'm thinking about Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Shaye Moss, who won a massive default judgment in a Washington, D.C. federal district court against Rudy Giuliani. They later settled with him outside of court for an undisclosed sum of money. But the determination there was made that they were lied about rampantly, that the exchange of a thumb drive that was alleged in all sorts of Republican publications, in a movie, ad nauseum on the internet, that none of that was true, that she was handing her a ginger mint, as you'll remember. And so these are allegations that have been well trodden. They've never been proved. And in fact, time and time again, they have been disproven by audits in courts and otherwise, Chris.